Wow, that was unexpected. All right, so you can see the image behind me. What's the first word or association that pops into your mind when you see an image like that? A tightrope, and an associated word that would go along with that is this idea of balance, and that's my topic this morning. So I just want to be really clear. This is not a sermon. It is a talk, and it's really aimed at college students. So if you're not a college student, you're not my target audience. But I also have a couple of disclaimers. When you start to search for images of things like balance, it tends to look something, let's see. Okay, so this is my title, Imperfectly Balanced, or How to Adult. And again, if you're over 50, that might not make much sense to you. But when you look for images of balance, you tend to get images like this. You know, these really harmonious, beautifully composed pictures. They're very clean, they're very organized, or things like, you know, people doing yoga poses on the beach at sunset. You know, not the most realistic kind of images maybe. So they tend to look like perfection, but the type of balance that I'm going to be talking about to you today is actually pretty messy at times. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. People who look like they have it all together, well, they probably don't actually. They've just learned to cope with stressors, or maybe they're really good at masking. So I'm not up here because I have all of the answers, or I'm somehow living this perfectly balanced life. That's simply not true if you witnessed my flurried entrance to the stage this morning. So in order to talk to you guys, and I really hope that you can hear my heart on this, I'm going to try to be honest with you about some things in my life that are maybe a little bit less than flattering at times, because I want to be usefully transparent. I'm not trying to overshare, but I want you guys to understand that when I say these things, I really mean them because I've been there and I've experienced it. So for instance, there have been, and there still are, components of my life that have sometimes been way out of balance. So some examples that come to mind are areas like entertainment, relationships and boundaries, food. So there are different areas that each of us sometimes struggle to find a balanced approach to in life. But even though I'm really far away from the picture of a perfectly balanced life, it's something that I'm really interested in and something that I'm continually trying to get better at. I'm working on it. So some of this is going to be from research, but mostly it's just ideas that I've assimilated over the years or that I've learned about from experience. Again, I want to be balanced in my approach to this topic. So on the one hand, I don't want anyone to walk out of here feeling discouraged, like, oh no, this is yet another area where I'm falling short. But on the other hand, I'm not trying to give myself or anyone else a free pass if there are things that God is talking to us about and saying, yeah, that's something you could work on. That's something you could get better at. So those are my disclaimers. So we can work on this area, we can get better at it, and even though it's not always fun working on it, it is useful and it is valuable. So in a physical context, balance is one of those things that's critically important, but a lot of times we're not even really aware of it. Because unless something isn't working properly, it pretty much just regulates on its own. Our balance system helps us to walk, run, move, do basically any physical motion without falling. We cannot successfully navigate our physical circumstances unless we have the ability to balance. And similarly, I think it's really difficult for us to navigate the rest of our lives if we don't learn this idea of internal balance. And clearly, different people have different levels of skill when it comes to physical balance, right? Think, circus performers like the tightrope walker versus maybe, the Three Stooges. So partly some of those differences may be innate, but a lot of it has to do with nurture, with what you do, what you practice, and what you do to try to change yourself. And so what I'm getting at here is the idea that it is possible to improve our balance through practice. There are a couple of reasons that I feel like this topic is really important for us here today at GBS, and why I was talking to President Avery about this. Life has always been complex, but sometimes it seems that our lives in the 21st century are even more complex. We have a ton of competing forces in our lives that, if we let them, are just going to soak up our time, our energy, our willpower. Those things could be spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. The list could go on. Not all of those forces are in opposition to each other, but it's pretty easy for certain parts of our life to start taking over and sort of dominating everything else in our lives. So stop and think for a moment about your life. Is there one thing that is sort of dominating or controlling your life right now? For you as students, it might be academics or maybe socializing. For maybe the rest of us, it probably tends to be work a lot of times. So we want to think about what are those things that kind of tend to control us, because I think balance has to do with control as well. If external forces are controlling us, there's a possibility that things are out of balance. Not only are our lives sort of really distracted and harried and filled with the distractions of technology, making it hard to be balanced, but I think there are some pressures or pitfalls that are somewhat unique to an institution like this one. For most college students, I think the 4 years or so that they spend at school are primarily two things. It's an education and it's an experience. So there's the academic side of things and there's the student life side of things. And you guys get both of that here, and you have to balance those. But there's a third component here at GBS that's really important, and I want to try to be really careful with what I'm saying here, and I hope that you'll understand what I'm really trying to get at. So here at GBS, there's a third component, spiritual growth. And this is wonderful and necessary, and it is super important. But sometimes in an atmosphere like this, I think there's a danger of beginning to over-moralize or beginning to moralize things that aren't necessarily moral choices. I'll just give you an example. If I said, which is more virtuous, a salad or a hamburger, which would you pick? Yeah, we're conditioned, right, to think that salads are more virtuous, they're more moral than cheeseburgers. Actually, they're not. They're inanimate objects. They are not inherently evil or righteous in and of themselves. There are smarter nutritional choices that can be made there. I'm not downplaying that. But sometimes I think we get into this trend of over-moralizing, and I think the danger there is that it can just add this immense pressure to your already pressured lives. And so it can just kind of leave you ridiculously stressed, feeling like you're a complete failure when it comes to this thing called being a grown-up. So again, I just really want to emphasize, let me be clear, I'm not talking about rationalizing sin. I'm not talking about saying things are okay that God clearly says are not okay. What I am talking about is not turning every single life choice into a moral issue. For instance, maybe the time that we get up, or the time that we get out of bed, or whether or not our bed is made. I think those things can be related to moral issues. Maybe they can be symptoms sometimes of a deeper issue, but in and of themselves, I don't see them as moral choices. They're really good things to do, and they're things that I think are important and necessary to learn as you're working on assuming adulthood, and really they will have a positive impact on your life if you can learn to do them. But if you haven't learned to do them all just yet, all the time, perfectly, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you are sinning. So something that I really want to emphasize as well is that balance relies on centering. So if you were standing on a narrow ledge, you would need to find what's called your center of gravity. So we need to have our spiritual center of gravity in God. I think that Proverbs 4:20-27 really captures something about this when it says, "My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Keep your mouth free from perversity. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips." So he's just given all of these commands about how we are to live our lives. And then here's where I see it being tied to this idea of balance. The last few verses say, "Let your eyes look straight ahead, fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil." So it's this idea of don't go into the weeds on the right hand or on the left. Try to stick to the center. So to connect this to something that I said earlier, I think the educational and the experiential parts of your time here at GBS are great, and they're very important. And I'll talk more about them later. But if we come here and we miss out on God, then we've missed out on the most important thing. If we truly mean it when we call this place God's Bible School and College, then we need to put him first. He needs to be the top priority. Otherwise, this might sound harsh, but we might as well, if we're not going to prioritize God, we might as well just pack it in and go to a secular institution. So I can't emphasize how important, when we're looking for balance in our lives, how important it is for us to be seeking to draw close to God and asking him to help us to find balance. All right, so this doesn't mean that you're going to get it all right all of the time, but it means that you're seeking after him. You're working on it. Something else that I want to talk about here is what I call the myth of perfection. Now, again, I just really want to clarify. I'm not talking about the issue of Christian perfection. I'm not talking about moral issues here. Because with God's moment-by-moment grace, we can live above sin. But I'm talking about the pressure to keep up the appearance of a perfect life. Because sometimes I feel like it's easy to start looking around at everyone else and doing that comparison game, right? Like, oh wow, they look like they have it all together. They must never struggle with anything. That's not the case. And I think probably sometimes as students, maybe you feel that about the people who sit on the platform, or maybe, student leaders or things like that. But that's probably not the case. There are probably internal struggles that they're dealing with that are just not apparent to you. Each one of us has hurts and things in our backgrounds that we have to deal with and that have shaped us into who we are. So I'm not trying to encourage oversharing here. I think there's enough of that. But I do think there is a need for authenticity and for seeking to connect with each other in a real manner. So when I talk about this issue of perfection, I think we really get hammered with this through social media. Because with social media, there's the possibility of sort of what I call curating your life. You can put on display the moments that you want to display, and you can hide the moments that you don't want to share. And so it's easy to create this persona of, that looks really glitzy and glamorous, but maybe isn't all that realistic. So, you've heard of Pinterest Perfect. If you look for kitchen inspiration on Pinterest, you get images like this, It's these gleaming, empty countertops, everything is sparkling, it's just this gorgeous, wonderful kitchen. Nothing is out of place, nothing is even on the counters, which is totally not realistic, I can tell you right now. And I hope this is not a stupid thing to do, But sometimes the reality looks a little bit more like this. This is my kitchen, and it's old, and there's a stack of unwashed dishes sitting on the sink. So that's not something I typically go around sharing on social media, and there are good reasons for that. But when all we see is the Pinterest image, it's easy to forget about the reality of everyone else's lives. And so, intellectually, we may sort of know that, but I think it's really easy to forget that sometimes this curated reality that we see is not all that directly connected to the actual reality of people's lives. And what that can do, that continual comparison, it can feel us leaving like we have to be perfect in everything. Job, clothes, career, spouse, house, kids, fashion, all of that. And it's not realistic. That idea that you can do it all, you can have it all, and you can do it with perfect ease, I don't think is very true. And it's easy to then start feeling like, well, I just don't measure up. So, that said, on the plus side, at least all of this comparison does lend itself to some great memes, So, just throwing that in there for you. Another problem with perfectionism is that it can potentially lead to this, what I call the all or nothing approach. So either I do it all perfectly all of the time, or I don't do it at all, because that's just way too much pressure, and so I'm just gonna let everything slide. We all have coping mechanisms for stress, but this type of avoidance, even though I've been guilty of it at times, I can tell you is not a healthy one. It reminds me of a thought-provoking saying. It's commonly attributed to Voltaire, that the best is the enemy of the good. And you might be sitting there thinking, shouldn't I do my best? Yes, but we need an informed understanding of what your best really is. I think a while back, Dr. Phil had provided a pretty useful definition of what doing your best really means. It was something along the lines of giving your best effort, given the time, resources, and other responsibilities that you have. So you're not asking, is this the best work that a super talented person could do in a perfect universe, but rather, is this the best that I can do given my current context, circumstances, demands on my time, things like this. So this is going to look different for different people. So what we're trying to avoid is getting into this mindset of, I can't measure up, so I'm not even going to try, because I think when we get into this all or nothing, this perfectionistic mindset, it can be really paralyzing at times. So if we recognize, I can't do it all, I have limited resources with which to meet the demands of the world, and that looks different from person to person, right? We don't all have the same talents or abilities or backgrounds, limitations, flaws, all of those things. All of those go into determining our ability to deal with circumstances. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to figuring these things out. So how do you figure out what to do? First of all, this is going to seem really obvious, but talk to God. Ask Him. Say, I'm not sure what I should be doing here. Can you help me figure this out? Second, talk to people that you respect and that you trust, and ask them for advice for making these important decisions. When it comes to balancing, I think the most important skill that you guys can learn is that of prioritization. So, in order to achieve the essentials, you will sometimes have to let the inessentials slide. Let me say that again. In order to achieve the essentials, you will sometimes have to let the inessentials slide. So, when I was a student, there were times when internally I felt like everything was kind of spinning out of control, partly because I was an inveterate procrastinator. But externally, I don't think most people would have known that. I was sort of usually able to keep a handle on it. And any success that I had in doing that, I think, was due to working on this, working on prioritizing my time and the list of things that I had to get done. So for instance, there were plenty of times when I would sacrifice sleep in order to finish major assignments. On the other hand, there were times when I would say, okay, I'm going to take a late grade in my collateral reading, or you know what, this is a really tiny assignment. It's going to make up about 1% of my final grade. I'm not going to do that because I'm pooling my resources for more important things. So I'm not, listen to me, I'm not encouraging slacking. That's, please don't let that be your takeaway from this. I am encouraging you guys to learn to be smart about how you prioritize things and focus on the big things. Put the essentials first and then follow up with the inessentials as much as you can. So the reason I sometimes did those sorts of things, sacrificing just a little bit on the academic side, was in order for things like, okay, I'm gonna get some sleep because I don't wanna continue living on minimal amounts of sleep and crash my immune system, because then I'm gonna be worse off. So make smart decisions. Sleep is important, sleep is good, get some. Also, I learned to strategize, so I figured out how instructors worked, which ones were willing to give extensions and which ones were not, and I used that to my advantage as necessary. This isn't manipulation, it was strategization. It was making smart decisions. It was good management of a limited number of resources. So, could I have been more balanced through discipline? Yes, I could have. But discipline doesn't get built overnight. And so I was dealing with my reality as it stood. I was trying to manage the resources that I did have as effectively as I could. Another thing, here, let me pull this up. So some of your top concerns as students, I would guess, are these. These are not prioritized in order of importance, but rather alphabetized. So academics, finances, the physical side of things, so either your appearance or your physical well-being, the social side of things, and then the spiritual aspect. So all of these are important, but some of them are obviously more important than others. So you need to figure out your financial priorities. And when I give these examples, this is not me holding myself up to say, here, you all go do this. I'm just giving you examples of things that worked for me. So when it came to finances, I tried to be moderate. I tried to not be totally ascetic, like, no, I will never go out, I will live in my dorm room, and I will never spend money on anything. You know, I went to Starbucks a couple of times. On the other hand, there were times when I did say no, when I said, you know, I'm sorry, I just can't afford it. And so, you know, trying to be smart in your approach to these things. Also, when it came to paying for college, and I know different people feel differently about this topic, so I don't expect you all to take this approach, but I tried to be moderate in how I paid for college. I didn't have the cash to pay for it up front. I was paying for it on my own. So I did work some jobs, but I also assumed a small amount of debt because here was my reasoning. I saw it as an investment in my future, and I didn't see the point of paying for classes that I didn't do well in or that I failed. And so I prioritized my academics over the finances in order to reach a goal. And then I graduated with, I would say, a pretty reasonable amount of debt. It was less than $10,000. And for 4 years at a private residential institution, that's not bad, just let me tell you. And within a couple of years of graduation, I was able to have that paid off with the help of my husband. So I'm just saying we need to, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm just trying to give you guys practical examples real life examples of places where we can work to be balanced in our lives. So basically what I'm saying is you need to learn to do cost-benefit analysis. Do the benefits of what I'm thinking about doing here outweigh the costs of what I'm thinking about doing here? And then base your decision on that. And prioritization is something that I still have to work on today. There are times when, as you saw from the picture of my kitchen, I don't always focus on my house as much as I should or would like to, because there are more consequences if I show up to school with no lesson plans. So I'm prioritizing. And there are many other examples of that. Could I technically get everything done that I should? Yeah, probably. But I'm not there yet. I'm still working on it. I'm trying to get better in these areas, but it's a growth process. All right, so my next point, failure is not final. And this might sound like one of those cheesy motivational sayings like, "You're beautiful just the way you are." Well, maybe not. But I think this idea is really important, and it has a lot of truth for us. It's not a free pass, again, especially when it comes to sin, but when we do fail, morally or otherwise, God's great big grace is there, and we are given an opportunity to get up and try again and again and again. I'm not talking about living in failure on purpose or just wallowing around in it, but I am talking about not being paralyzed by our failures. So if you are maybe looking back over the last 9 weeks of school, or maybe the last year, or whatever time period, thinking, "Man, I messed up," know that there's hope for the future. You do not have to stop with your failures. Failing does not make you a failure. In addition to the fact that failure is not final, I and a lot of other smart people, smarter than me, would argue that failure is actually both good and necessary because it's an awesome teacher. Henry Petrotsky, he's an engineer, and he describes the value of failure this way. He says, "It reveals weaknesses, it helps make things stronger, and offers lessons in humility. Further, failure shows us when something is not working as we had planned." He's speaking from a design standpoint. When you design something, you expect it to behave or perform a certain way. If it doesn't, then there are lessons to be learned from that. So I would encourage you to look at your failures as an opportunity for growth. And yes, it is painful to fail. It's embarrassing. It hurts. I know. I've been there. But it's worth asking in that moment, what can I learn from this? In addition to humility, of course. Finally, well, not quite finally, sorry, I take that back. It's all about growth. So this first image is the image of a seedling. And over here, you have the image of an old growth tree in a forest. What's the difference between these two? Time, maturity. We are works in progress. Discipline and willpower are good, and they are necessary, but they're like a muscle. And if you've ever done any sort of weightlifting or bodybuilding, you know that it takes time and deliberate effort to develop them and to maintain them. So it's going to take time and effort to implement and to maintain changes in your life, no matter what area they're in. Also, I just want to say here that some of the things that we deal with personally have a lot to do with the background that we come from and how we were raised. So something that comes easily for one person may take a lot of effort to change for someone else. For instance, I mentioned earlier that I sometimes struggle to keep my kitchen clean. And I'll be perfectly honest, partly that's because of how I was raised. I didn't grow up with Betty Crocker for my mom. So here I am in my late 20s, and I'm still trying to change some habits that were ingrained or not changed in 18 years of living at home. So maybe by the time I'm 36 and I've been away from home 18 years, I'll have it all figured out. But what I want to emphasize here is set attainable goals. So start small. Don't say, by the end of this week, I will have transformed my life. I will have caught up on every single late homework assignment, and I will be on time for everything, and I will have a brand new wardrobe and have lost 20 pounds or whatever. You have to start small and set attainable goals. And when you do that, then as you start to meet those goals, celebrate that. Celebrate the little victories. And if you're really conscientious, I know some of you you're really conscientious, and anytime somebody said something critical, you're like, oh no, it was me. I'm a terrible person. So if that's you, give yourself some grace. If you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you're just like, don't care about this stuff, you tend to write things off a little too easily, maybe be honest about it and give yourself a little kick. Okay, now, finally, here's my last point. This is truly my last point. Leave a margin. The more you pile on your life, the more of a mess is going to be if and when it all comes crashing down. So I think the key here is boundaries. Sorry, I just had to insert this picture because I saw this on my way down to the cafeteria the other day, and I thought, now if that isn't an image of precariously perched life, I don't know what is. So I and a lot of the other faculty and administration here, we recognize that we place a lot of demands on you guys as students. You have classes, you work, chapel, ministry, 15-hour time, community service, required school events, and the list could go on. So I realize that you don't necessarily have just a ton of room to work with when it comes to creating margin in your life. But you do still have a choice in the matter. You can choose how many extracurriculars you're going to pile on, how many, dare I say, intramural sports you will choose to play, how much time you're going to allow yourself to spend on leisure and distractions. And I'm talking to myself here. Facebook can be a huge time sucker. Video games, texting, social media, all of that stuff. How much time you're going to spend with friends. You have agency in this matter. So what I'm talking about here is this idea of building boundaries in your life, maybe personal, maybe technological, and I think this is especially important when it comes to relationships, both in friendships and in dating. And I just want to emphasize, coming to college is pretty radical in a lot of ways. You go through a lot of changes. So you go from living with this relatively small group of people that you've spent your whole life with and you are connected to both through the amount of time spent with them and also through blood, your family. And then you come several or perhaps hundreds of miles away and you're living in a building with 50 plus other people who are not your family, whom you may or may not know, and whom you quickly begin to forge different types of relationships with. And it takes some time and some doing to learn how to function well in this new environment. So, last personal example. As a freshman, I had some friends who loved to come and hang out in my room until the wee hours of the morning, keeping me from sleep and also distracting me from homework. And I didn't have the smarts or the guts to say, sorry guys, I can't hang out tonight, or, to not even let them in my room, that kind of stuff. Or to gently kick them out at 11 p.m. But I'm bringing that up because I want you guys to know it's okay for you to do that. You don't have to spend 24/7 with someone to be in a good relationship, to be a good friend, to be a good boyfriend or girlfriend. It's okay to have good, healthy boundaries and to set aside time for quietude, time for reflection, time a quiet space for you to rest and to focus and have time with God. So we need to have margin in our lives. So that's just a recap of what I talked about. In sum, learning to balance is tough. It takes practice. And even though we'll probably never achieve perfect balance here on Earth, because there's this constantly shifting set of pressures that we face, we can all keep improving. We can keep getting better at it. So, thank you guys for your time and attention and for letting me talk to you about this today.